Welcome, everyone, to Access California podcast. My name is Stephan Thomas. I am the program director for Access California, and I am sitting next to my lovely co-pilot, Claire. Claire, do
Hi,
you want to?
Stephan. My name is Clare.
Hi.
Right. I'm your coworker, and I'm ready to podcast with you.
We are podcasting today, and today we are going to talk. We're gonna have a little bit of a Recovery 101 sort of series. So we're going to talk a little bit about the recovery model as it pertains to mental health versus some of the sort of medical model. And then we're going to maybe share a little bit about our own experiences, and we'll kind of just take it from there. I think we, if you've been watching, you can tell that we kind of go off on very, very wise tangents when it comes to talking about mental health and talking about mental health systems. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today.
You want me to roll with it?
Yeah, let's go.
Because we talk a lot, so I'll just pick up where the conversation started this morning. And, I think outside of when you have like a group of people that have a very unique experience, you develop your own lingo, right? Like your own slang, your own understanding shared. If you have a shared experience that other people don't have, then you start talking about things amongst yourselves in a certain way. And, I know that we do, and the whole kind of movement of mental health consumers has language that I think people outside of the community don't really know about, and so we'll be bitching and talking about the medical model and how this is completely inadequate to support us in living the lives we want to live, pursuit of happiness, with some very impactful disabilities, and so I think I'll just throw out what that is, what is that criticism that we're making when we talk about the medical model. And I think really it's, the conception of disability just strictly from the medical profession, right? Their idea of what these disabilities are and what you should do about them. And so obviously the history of this community with the medical profession is ugly. It's like medicine gave us trepanation, which is I'm going to drill a hole in your head to let the evil spirits out, and just lobotomies, all kinds of wild stuff, came out of a mentality that, a deficit-based view of disability, where it's you're not like us, you're different, you're lesser, you're problematic in various ways. And so, sort of the task is to restore you towards normality, right? And these are the valuable people, the normal people. So we should get you closer to normal if we can, because, that's the good thing to be. It's not all kind of like that, but, it basically focuses on the interventions that it has. And so what interventions does it have? It has medications that aren't very good, but sometimes reduce, people's symptoms and make the disability more manageable in that way for people. And then talk therapy. Those are really the only kind of modalities though that exist in the medical insurance, medical system for us, is reduce your symptoms, or cope with them in some fashion. And I think that's a fundamentally different take than a point of view and the concept of recovery. So that's the smack that we're talking when we talk about the medical model. It's that's what we're saying to each other, medical model. Yeah. So over to you for the introduction on what is recovery.
Yeah. And so, I think, recovery-centered practices have been around for a while. But I think it's important to talk about what is, the recovery model when it comes to mental illness, and what it comes to when we start discussing substance abuse disorder, and the recovery, the medical model tends to be centered around, okay, you have a symptom. okay, let's treat the symptom, let's eradicate that symptom, and see you later. Hope you do well, right? Whereas the recovery model takes the fact that I am a real person that experiences real symptoms from a very real mental health challenge or mental illness, um, but that I have a real designation and trajectory for what I want to see out of my life. And the recovery model takes takes all of that makes me who I am, and it asks myself, okay, what do you want to do with all of this? Where do you see yourself? How do you want to live with these these mental health challenges? I myself, I'm diagnosed with bipolar 2. I have complex PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder. I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't? And I have ADHD. So I'm well equipped in my mental health journey and trajectory.
And in our community, when it starts adding up like that, you're just getting cooler and cooler. We're like, yep.
Yeah, I most certainly have a personality. Absolutely. My character is strong, robust even. But, when I started having these conversations with my primary care physician, when I started this recovery process about 9.5 years ago, the first thing that happened is I was given, trazodone, I was given Wellbutrin, and I was given oh gosh, it was some other antidepressant, and they're like, okay, check back with me in 6 months to a year and tell me how that was. And unfortunately at the time those treatments did not stick, and going into a psychiatry program was challenging because of accessibility. There were, talk therapy challenges with psychotherapy, as well as just getting a psychiatric appointment. So you might be experiencing a mental health challenge and not be able to see a psychiatrist or even get an intake for 3 or 4 months, right? And that was kind of my experience. And so I think, and especially as we talk about older populations who go in and they talk to their primary care physician because they're not sure about mental health, or maybe there's stigma around mental health, we get a lot of, just as I was, misdiagnosed for quite a number of years.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And so one of my favorite people, who is a mentor to me now, but started out as my therapist, her name is Donna, and she asked me one day, she said, who would you be without your trauma? Who would you be without who would you be without these diagnoses? What would your story be? And, I said I wanted to go to school, and so I went to school at 30 years old, and I wanted a doctoral degree, and, I'm 3 months away from completing that. And then she said, okay, so that is what we're going to do. And your story is still you, and your mental health, your mental illnesses are still you. At the time, I was also recovering from a debilitating substance abuse disorder, and that was also still me, but it wasn't the summation of my experience, and my symptoms were not me. The symptoms were just experiences that I had. And so she helped me design a work plan around how to achieve these goals with my mental illness, with my treatment. How am I making these systems communicate with a little bit more transparency instead of working away from each other? And the whole idea is that I'm very, very sort of blessed and privileged in this way, but I'm able to live my life with my treatment, yes, with my psychotherapy, yes, with all of these, efforts that I put into my mental health, but I still get to live my life following my dreams and my goals, without just being forced to suppress the symptoms for the sake of insurance billing. Let's be real. Let's be real about it. Spicy, right. And I could talk about that one. Trust. But no, seriously, because recovery is so individualized, and we don't like we don't like qualitative outcomes because we don't make money off of qualitative outcomes,
Also a
right?
spicy take.
Right?
Talk
And
about that all day.
we can. I certainly can. But so that's where the recovery model comes in, is how have I been able to live my life with my mental illness, with my recovery from substance abuse challenges, with, times of mental health crisis, or the activation of some of the diagnostic criteria that might pop up, some of those symptoms that might pop up,
Yeah.
and then how do I have the supportive care around that as I'm living my life, right?
Nailed it. I mean, exactly. This is
Yeah.
this is what people don't understand. It's like, and uh, it's there's a completely different mentality when you're like, I am going after goals and things I find intrinsically rewarding, and I'm encountering my disability not as sort of a deficit in and of itself, but as potentially presenting as a barrier or a challenge to things that I want. And it's just a completely different mindset. And I think too, I mean, we don't, recovery is not just about symptoms. It's about living in a world that don't like us.
Speaking of
do not
spicy.
like us, systemic discrimination in every single institution. They don't want to see us coming. Like, you pick one, like, you will face discrimination. And also, you're a devalued person, you're a devalued identity. And I think a lot of recovery for people is also just like dealing with that ego death of like how painful it is to be, more or less continuously told that you're trash, you're not welcome, you're not desirable as an employee or a partner or a student or as a professional. And that's real. And I think, I know you talked a little bit about your personal stuff, so I'll talk some about mine. But I think, some of the ways in which I've driven myself really hard over the past, like, probably half decade at this point, was like as a direct response to that. Like, how am I going to take my power and my value back from this world that has taken it from me? Because people don't talk about that. People don't talk about how painful it is for members of our community to have to live this way, especially when they have very impactful disabilities that, land them in abject poverty or living in housing that's stigmatized and segregated, or they're the only people who have experienced like these extreme forms of violence in jails and institutions. And, in one way or another, there's a lot of folks, not just with trauma, but they've experienced, medical model, especially like court ordered or forced or involuntary or through the criminal justice system, injustice system. They have experienced, all this disempowerment and violence. And the only way that these systems ever look at them is through the lens of kind of like a mental health probation. Like, we're going to use punishment and deprivations and suffering. We're going to impose a bunch of suffering on you till you behave, and there's, that's where a lot of the resistance, again, like, if you want to decode what we are saying to each other.
Yes.
When we say, medical model,
Wink.
that's what we're saying. It's like there's this idea that there are systems and mentalities that really view disability through a deficit lens and a sort of very ableist lens. And then there are, but this idea, I think it's really important to say where the recovery model came from, especially with serious mental illness. It came from people with serious mental illness. It came out of a model very, in a way, like community members caring for each other in a peer-to-peer way that is very similar to what the substance use community developed for themselves with like having a sponsor or, building community around and supporting the folks that are going through this very difficult experience and understanding that the people that get it and know how to help you navigate it to a better life are the people that have walked the walk.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you mentioned peer, the importance and the value of peers, because, and I think we can talk a little bit about this also in the second half of this podcast, is that anybody who's experienced the need to get to access mental health services have likely experienced the same thing. You go, you make the phone call, you make the appointment, you get the referral from, your primary care, however it is, but you find yourself into this building after maybe getting, put on a wait list for anywhere between 3 weeks to several months for an intake. You get your intake, and then you can't see your psychiatrist for another month. And while you're waiting in this building, you're waiting with a lot of other people that may or may not have mental health challenges or just mental illness diagnosis, or know that there is something coming up for them where they might think that they're going to have a mental health diagnosis when they leave the building. But there's all this paperwork that you have to fill out. There is basically validating that you're here for a reason, right? Because, forget knowing your own body or knowing your own mind, right? You have to then validate that, right? Then you have to do the GAD-7. Have I been anxious in the last 2 weeks? Or the PHQ-9? Have I had symptoms of depression, and all of these things? And you're being asked all of these things, and you're being filled out all of these things, and then you're told to wait. Right. And I think what's cool about, peer support, and I'll share my experience on this. When I was, and this is in a medical model, so it's a little bit different, but when I was diagnosed with HIV back 10 years ago now, after getting a confirmation and going into a clinic for the first time, I noticed right away that people were standing right at the door, and they had T-shirts, and they had something that said peer on the front of it, right? Oh. And they were very easily seen right away. I could see, and I had no idea what that meant, right? This was like a different lens into the medical model, and they came right up to me. They walked me up to the counter. They walked me through, all of the paperwork that I needed, even though I was more than capable of doing it myself. Right, because I had experience with systems before. I've been a systems fighter for a long time. It was the fact that there was somebody else there that brought down my nerves, right? That really helped me feel like I was in the right place at the right time. And that's just for that was for a brand new diagnosis when I had no idea, the state of medications for HIV. I had very little HIV education. I grew up in the 90s where HIV was a completely different lethal beast, right? Yeah. And so, entering this environment, and I had these peers there that actually talked to me more and sat with me more than a lot of the providers did. Let's be real about it. I felt comfortable, and I felt like this was something that I could do, and I didn't feel alone. And I think that same model, and this kind of is centered to the recovery model, outside of just being able to live with, whatever diagnosis, but living with your diagnosis in the way that you want to live, in the direction that you want to go. The important aspect of this is, imagine if you were to go into a psychiatry center, and they're always late. Let's be real. They're never on time, right? Not calling anyone out, but they're never.
Know how valuable their time is. I mean,
they're never on time. But imagine
they don't make as much as them.
No, but they're never on time. And so imagine that gap, that nervousness, that all of those feelings that are brought up with that. But instead, imagine having that with a peer engaging and talking with you, and sharing hey, I've gone through this too, and there's a way to recover from this, and you can recover, and having that peer presence is so important in the recovery model itself. Yeah. And I think we often don't talk about that importance.
Yeah, you're making me realize, just I'm thinking back to when I got diagnosed, and I didn't have any health. I lost my job. I didn't have any health insurance. I was Medi-Cal eligible, but it took Medi-Cal 90 days to approve me, so I don't have any health insurance. there's not a lot of places you can go with no health insurance and access mental health care. So it was a peer support worker that was my care.
Mm-hmm.
And you're making me realize too, it's like, when you think about it, it's like, what do you get out of the medical system? You get a psychiatry appointment, maybe once every 6 weeks if you're okay. If you're not okay, maybe once a week, and for an hour if you're lucky. And the access and intensity of therapy is very low, especially in this state too. So people are like, I get to see my therapist once every 6 weeks. I get to, and if you were to get quote unquote intensive services, you might be seeing that person once a week.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of hours when you're really struggling in between those little windows. And anybody who's been through anything knows that that is massively inadequate to support someone. And a lot of our folks, because of the ways in which serious mental illness in particular causes people to avoid you or you to withdraw from them, our folks are really socially isolated. And they oftentimes they don't have the natural networks that a lot of people do. Your friends from work, or just your social interaction at work, the friends you met in school. They don't have any money to be involved. Everything costs money, so they may not be involved in the community in a way. And so, we're also, part of like peer support. One of the values of it is, that we're not supposed to have a hierarchical relationship with this person, right? I'm not a provider and you're the patient. I'm not the sort of wise and blah, 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 and you're the inferior. It's not like that, right? It's not hierarchical. It's anti-discriminatory. It is about building community. It is not against the like professional ethics of like our community and our practice to remain friends with people or to, go to a social gathering together. You know what I mean? And so it's a lot more like the model of like, like a sponsor in some 12-step programs or those kind of things where it's like, it's just the lack of that very narrow type of relationship and the understanding that, recovery requires more than just treating symptoms. And I forget what all the SAMHSA stuff is, like home, health, purpose, something else.
Yeah.
There's a thing.
There is a thing.
A standard thing. But I mean, we know it more naturally than the standard thing. But I mean, I think that's really, when I hear you like, so accurately recount like sort of the loneliness of that experience or the isolation of that experience. Yeah, I mean, it's really, that's where like peer support workers, mental health peer support workers, which is, we invented for ourselves because we needed things that the system wasn't giving us. So we innovated and that's, sort of what has come out of that. And it's a body of work that, especially in the state of California, this community's had to kick down doors for. This isn't a pioneering state when it comes to mental illness. So let me see. So, I mean, we're going to do a second segment where we get into that a little bit more and sort of what's the importance of these things as we see a lot of systems change and big policy change in California. I think, when I think back on like everything that my peer support worker did for me, it was holistic, right? Mm-hmm. And she was trying to find me that support for those hours in the day when I was not okay, and she did all kinds of things, I mean, she was incredible. And she, she like assessed my spirituality and where I could practice that and where I would have like a welcoming community. And so, okay, there was another hour during the week when I could go be with people that, were just terrific.
Yeah.
And have some kind of, shared culture with, really. She found people that like religiously, politically, kind of everything, like it was shared culture. And so I had that because of her. And she did introduce me to like I mean, it's sort of, but I don't like to say coping mechanisms because I just like it's the whole thing. But, but she did introduce me to like some practices that I find really therapeutic and important, and I keep doing. Um, and she was a person able to relate to what it's like to be us in the world, and it ain't pretty a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, it was just you feel validated for having had bad experiences in the past, and they were bad. And but actually, like the thing that she did that, like we're friends, so I need to like call her and be like, why did you do that? But she is the person who like she had enough wisdom when she looked at me that she said this thing that just changed everything for me. And she was like, there's some people that need to get better in order to work, and there are some people that need to work in order to get better. And she was like, you're the second type. And she actually was really pushing me to be a peer support worker. And I was like, girl, I am crying all day. Like, I am crawling out of my skin. I am so messed up right now. Like, how could you possibly suggest that I go take care of someone else? Because I didn't understand that the peer model was not hierarchical, right? And it wasn't, I mean, people do want to have some experience of recovery, but she just had this completely different mentality where she was like, like really what you need to do is like you need a job, and you need a job where you take care of other people, and that's how you're going to get better. And she couldn't have been more right.
Yeah, and I think that kind of falls under one of the principles of the recovery model, which is finding a sense of purpose. No matter how big, no matter how small, is how do you take what you have, everything that you bring, like the value of lived experience, and how do you find a sense of purpose within that, right? And a great place to start is typically as a peer, right? Because that whole adage of like it takes a village is no lie, right? And often, I know for me, I want a village that either looks like me or has the same experiences as me, because there is so much like a self-affirming approaches with that, and it's very validating, right? That like, yeah, all right, sweet, I can make it through this, I can work through this, and I don't have to just stuff it down and stuff it out and put it in a box and put it under a closet under the stairs, right? I can like experience life with all of these symptoms and understand they might activate some days and other days they might not, and that still is okay.
Yeah, and I think I mean, you're right. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I've been able to like, kind of have a very different life than I used to is like my work environment, because it's like there's a lot of us around here.
This is it.
It's not weird to come in and be like, I did not sleep last night, and I feel like I'm having a panic attack. We're like, yeah, we get it.
That was me yesterday.
I know, exactly. Like, what's going on with you? I don't know. I'm just pissed. Like, you know what I mean? It's like there's such a way in which we don't sort of like freak out about there being periods of intensity. And I think that's definitely been like a huge thing for me, is like, yeah, just like a sense of like we're just chill with each other, being like, this is what's up, and I think that that's so important too, that community, and that that embodiment and modeling and projection of this isn't going to swallow your whole life.
Yeah,
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, and
it feels like the end of the world, and it really doesn't help when the systems around you treat it like it's the end of the world.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I love working here for that reason also, because aside from just the regular stressors of the job, and the work that we do and how much we put out and we're producing, I don't have to feel like I have to be normal for the sake of everyone else's sense of safety, internal biases, or stigma related to mental health, right? Like all of that is out the window.
Yeah.
I can actually be and produce and experience whatever is coming up for me that day. And I don't have to add that second layer of thinking that I could be a potential problem or a deficit to my team. Because I might be having a mental health day, or because my anxiety is higher than normal, or maybe I'm just in a little bit of mania, no big deal, and I
in the club with me.
yes. Welcome to our mania podcast hour.
Oh, man,
We should rename it.
Um,
But I think we've got a great secondary segment for you all. We're going to talk a little bit more of the systems approach and how the recovery model with all of these changes, how we can still kind of approach the recovery model and sort of, where some of those advocacy points might come in handy when it comes to the peer structure. So thank you, Claire, for coming and hanging out with me again.
now it's your thing.
Huh? No, I don't know what it is. I always say that.
I'm teasing.
I maybe I should move out of the camera view just a little bit more. Maybe that, or you just come into the camera view. Well, no, I always appreciate our conversations because I think we start in one direction and we kind of let the conversation blossom, and I really value that. So, thank you.
Yes, I love talking to you too.
All right, everyone. Thank you for hanging out with us again. And as usual, please like and subscribe and share. And stay tuned for our next podcast. Bye, everyone.